Good evening, everyone. Emory Moynagh here for In His Image. And we're supposed to be doing a live reading of the Brady paper with Salvador Cordova, but I haven't heard from Sal yet tonight, so hopefully he is okay, and hopefully he's going to make it. I'll give him a little bit and see if he shows. Oh, there we go. There we go. There we go. There he is.
30 seconds late. Sorry.
It's all right. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I can blow smoke for 30 seconds. That's not a big deal.
Are we live?
Yes, we are.
Oh, wow.
We are. Yeah, I went live promptly because I didn't know what time you'd be here, so I figured I'd just go, and whenever you got here, you'd get here, and we'd roll with it. So, so thank you everybody to whoever is hopping in live. I don't know if we're going to have any viewers tonight or not, but hopefully, Lord willing, we will. We already have 3 likes, so some people plan on being here at least. So just for anybody who's new, if Sal, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and kind of letting everybody know who you are, what you're about, and what you do.
Yes, I'm Salvador Cordova. Ooh, where's that echo coming from?
It's not me, because I've got my volume on mute, so it's on your end somewhere, Sal.
Okay, we'll try again. Hi, I'm Salvador Cordova, and I'm a molecular biophysics research assistant to various scientists. I'm a Christian and a young Earth creationist, a young cosmos creationist. I used to believe in evolution, and the evidence just started to change my mind. And likewise for my views about the age of the universe and other things. Even though, maybe the young creationist model doesn't feel completely complete to me, I accept it on faith because there seems to be enough evidence on it. And so part of the reason I'm involved in molecular and biophysics is my background was in physics. I have a master's degree in applied physics from Johns Hopkins. And I did that because I was searching for solutions to the distant starlight problem and for radiometric dating. But then I ended up in biology because God's providing so much evidence that he created life. And so that's why I'm here. Emory gave me permission to rebroadcast this on my channel. So to my viewers who are there, I want to thank you for all your support. And I just want to reassure you that what you hear tonight doesn't represent the way I'll do business all the time, because we won't be totally nerdy on my channel. We will try to reach out to people who are not students of science or professors of science, which has been traditionally my outreach. I want to be of service to all of God's people, whatever their background is.
Yep. And that's a very good introduction for you. For anybody who's joining from Sal's channel, I am Emory Moynagh. I run the In His Image blog / YouTube channel / various social medias and whatnot. And we're going to be reading a paper by RH Brady. Now we've read 4 parts of this. Also, hello Godzilla, thank you for joining us tonight. We've read 4 parts of this paper already. Lord willing, fingers crossed, we will try and finish it tonight. And then just as a heads up for anyone coming in, I will be trying out streaming on Rumble over the weekend, and I'll be reading a paper on sexual selection and all some of the things that are wrong with sexual selection. So that'll be a fun read for everybody, hopefully. It's much shorter than the Brady paper, so it should not take 5 sessions. And like Sal, I won't always be operating on this level of nerd. Sometimes I do, but usually I'm usually a little bit lower level than this level of nerd. But this is a really good paper, and we've gotten a lot out of it so far. And I think that we'll hopefully get some more out of it tonight. So Lord willing, let's dive in and let's see how it goes. So let's bring the paper up here, and we left off last night on this point. Go ahead, Sal. Okay.
I just wanted to say. We do this for the honor and glory of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so even if this feels far removed, we believe it is of great value to Christ's kingdom. And what we're doing here is cleaning up a lot of the doo-doo. We're like janitors, okay? Janitors have their role, and dealing with some of the secular viewpoints that are very persuasive, and they have merit in that it's understandable how they could make these mistakes on some level.
Yep.
But what has happened is they're unwilling to correct the mistakes for whatever reason, partly because of the commitment to naturalism, and we mentioned names like Lewontin. But we're if this feels like dirty work, it feels like dirty work to me, because I'd rather be proclaiming the wonders of biology than talking about how awful evolutionary theory is. That's just, I get tired of it. So, but we need to do this also to clean house in the churches, in Christ's churches, because there's a lot of stuff that's accepting things that I don't think God wants to be taught in his church.
Yeah, and that's 100% true. There's a lot of, well, I'll just say false teaching out there, and there's a lot of heterodox stuff being said, even within churches that would be considered by some to be faithful. There's just a lot of stuff, a lot of garbage going around, and we need to clean up the garbage. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And so here is the headed back to the Brady paper. We picked up now. We've been going through this paper for a while, so I want you all to understand that, like, where we're starting here, this is our fifth read on this paper, fifth session we've done on this paper. So, of necessity, there's going to be some things that that are left over that may not make a whole lot of sense if you're jumping in here. I recommend, if you are jumping in here, we'll try to explain things as we go along, but if you want a full read, go to Sal's channel for the first 2.5 sessions, I guess. And then I did one last night, and then we're hopefully, Lord willing, finishing tonight.
Yes, and I was hoping that we could have kind of a recap at the end, and maybe to try to make this a little more, because this is a long, tedious paper. It was glorious, also from for any of the historians on this debate. But I think we can summarize and distill the points in a way that's helpful, because a lot has happened since 1979. That's making it easier to prosecute this case without having to be quite so verbose.
Yes, and there's also a lot of technical logic stuff in here that is not. It's not tangential because it needs to be there, but it's not directly science either. So, which may make it a little bit less appealing for people who are a little more science nerdy like us. But anyway, so we're going to pick up on the section on fruitfulness. Now, just as a little bit of context here, he's talking about how do you judge a theory? How do you judge something that has been proposed, and like what makes it a good theory? That's what he's getting at. Now, a theory may be judged by its fruitfulness, but only if one is clear about how this is to be measured. The term, when applied to the work of a historical period, usually means something different from a usage describing present work. Phlogiston chemistry might be judged a very fruitful episode in the 18th century chemistry, depending on what standard we use to estimate its worth, but one standard we shall not use is correctness. Phlogiston chemistry was also, by modern standards, incorrect. That conclusion does not prevent historians from crediting Priestley and his co-workers with various discoveries, advances in technique and empirical knowledge, etc., but no one will suggest that it would be fruitful now to return to an incorrect view. Fruitfulness of this type is limited to a time period, which is the past. Now, just so you know, phlogiston was a precursor to oxygen. Like they wanted to figure out what air was. And so what air, like, it's complicated, but basically they were trying to explain how air worked, but they didn't know what air was made of, and so they were trying to explain it with phlogiston. It's a little bit complicated, and there's a lot of history there, so we're going to bypass that. I'm just going to give it a little very, very skimpy overview there. It is obvious that the sort of fruitfulness I have just described is possessed in full by the power of the theory of natural selection. The power of this argument to convince its contemporary audience, when first put forward, is largely responsible for placing biology on an evolutionary footing. That's true. Darwin's arguments have a lot to do with evolution being accepted in the way it is today. But evolutionary biology is now in place and will remain so with or without the aid of natural selection. Ooh. The present fruitfulness of the principle must be estimated on standards which are independent of past revolutions.
I have to agree with that.
Yes, I know. I completely agree. I completely agree.
It's gonna stay as long as people are naturalistic.
Yeah, so long as people endorse some form of evolutionary naturalism, evolutionary biology is going nowhere. And I did a whole video on this, so if you want to go, watch my whole video I did on this, feel free. It's under the title "What's Wrong with His Genesis History," because I used a clip from his Genesis history to springboard into that discussion. But if you want to go watch why I don't think that evolution is going anywhere, go ahead and go watch that. That will hopefully make it make more sense to you. Right. So picking up where we were, the several ways by which estimations of present fruitfulness might be made divide into two major categories. Those methods that attempt to establish some line of demarcation between the scientific and non-scientific, such as falsifiability, and those which simply estimate the amount rather than the quality of work generated. Let us take the second case first. A theory which is popular enough to be applied often can be credited with the power to generate activity, but this is desirable only if some profit is derived from it. Mere activity in itself seems to have no intrinsic value other than paying the bills.
Ouch.
Ouch, yes.
Oh, by the way, when Emory and I said that we think evolutionary theory is here to stay, it's not because it's correct.
Yes, that's true. It's not because it's correct. It's just unless they can come up with a viable naturalistic alternative to it, it's going nowhere. And I don't think they can do it.
It's paid a lot in mortgages.
It's paid a lot more than mortgages, Sal.
Yeah.
Some of these college professors, they make quite a bit from their books and whatnot, so they're doing pretty well. And you know what? That's fine. I'm not upset with them doing well. Okay, so let me head that off before anybody says it. I'm not upset with them making money. I just wish they weren't doing it by peddling pseudoscience. But anyway. Where was I? The activity within the context of a community given to reflection and self-criticism, however, might be though a different matter. The lay public often equates simple activity within the community with progress, but this is only because the same public assumes that the scientist is privy to some criterion by which the quality of activity may be judged, i.e., a line of demarcation. Within the ranks of scientists, such a notion becomes circular.
If I may,
go ahead.
Just the reason certain ideas in physics and chemistry have persisted is because it brings modern technology. I can think one of the greatest theories developed in physics is electromagnetism. I mean, the ability to generate and control and utilize electricity, unimaginable. Mm-hmm. So that's one example where science kind of just propagated without any propaganda or promotion. It just worked. Mm-hmm. But then this is talking about fields of science that, like abiogenesis and evolutionary theory, it's like it has never advanced anything. Mm-hmm. That you couldn't advance it with another theory.
Right. The so-called advances for evolutionary biology are usually either minimal or non-existent, or are equally well explained by some other theory.
Right.
So
and outrightly false, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Scientists are well aware that their profession embraces certain critical standards. But were a scientist to defend a theory on the grounds that it had achieved consensus in the community, he would neglect the very standards which are premised as the basis of his argument, the standards by which the community judged the value of the theory in the first place. In other words, folks, consensus isn't science.
Amen.
Neo-Darwinists, sit up and pay attention. Consensus isn't science. So I don't care that the consensus of biology is that evolution is true. That doesn't make it true. That is a horrible argument. Stop using it.
What makes science, I mean, for me, what makes science is experiment and testability. Mm-hmm. I said, let's compare electromagnetic theory, its predictions, and the experiments related to it. If it's a wrong theory, it isn't far off. Let's put it that way. We wouldn't have modern technology if it were that far off as a theory.
Right.
So there has been challenges to some, like let's say amendments, but the basic theory is good enough. Same for celestial mechanics. We can move, even though it's Newtonian, and we talked about the slight differences between Einsteinian gravity and Newtonian. The Newtonian model is still good enough to put a lot of spacecraft to explore the solar system. It's very close enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so and there's going to be more beating up on consensus here, but we'll just please stop using the consensus argument. Please. It is a lousy argument. So please stop using it. Please stop using it. And I've noticed we got some more people. I hate love nothing. Thank you for joining. Glad you could be with us tonight. All right, so picking back up with Brady. Sorry, I got a little wound up about that, but I'm sick and tired of the consensus argument. I really am. Unless we assume science is to be infallible, the fact that a theory has been adopted does not justify that adoption. It is still possible to argue, on the other hand, that the continuous progression of theories through competition ensures the quality of the present survivors to be the, quote, best in the field. As Macbeth, 1971, has argued, the best in the field has meaning only in relation to the competing theories. If they are not of high quality, their successors cannot boast of any great achievement. Now, let me pause here, because that's important. That's important, okay? How many evolutionary biologists would say, yeah, the creation model is a high-quality model? If you find one, get yourself a cookie. Okay? So what that means is that if evolution is the quote-unquote best in the field, according to the evolutionists, it didn't get there by outcompeting good models. Oh. Which means itself, it may not be a good model by their own logic. That's their logic, not mine. Because none of them will tell you that the creation model is a good model. They won't. None of them will. Guarantee it. But if it's not, then that means that evolution itself may not be a good model. It just may be slightly better than the alternatives. Which, by the way, evolution is a very bad model. But that doesn't. But I'm using their logic to explain to you that they are, by saying the creation model is a bad model, they are opening up the possibility that evolution itself might be a bad model. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Anyway, moving on. This paper's amazing. I love this paper. Anyway.
Thank you, Paul Nelson.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Paul Nelson. I've never met you, but thank you very much. And if we possess a criterion independent of the results of competition by which to judge the quality of theories, why refer to the competitive aspect at all? The, quote, best in field fallacy, as Macbeth terms it, is only another way of asserting the authority of the community without examining the standards from which the authority is derived. The authority of the scientific community is, for any member of that community, a compromised witness. It fosters an indefinite faith in serendipity, which suggests that any theory that generates activity must advance science. After all, activity implies change, and all change, given the inevitable advance of science, accumulates in progress. The mysticism of this view looks somewhat more recognizable if recast in the form of a sociological description. It is probably true, that is, any community of co-workers which spends its energy carrying out practices dictated by communal belief and shared technique will believe that such energy is fruitfully spent. Business as usual is profitable business. But while this may be an accurate description, it is self-defeating as an argument. By the assumption that any theory that has been adopted is good enough, we relinquish, contrary to intention, the attempt to judge the value of the particular theory. In other words, just because a theory is adopted doesn't mean that it's a good theory. Right? Hopefully this is sinking into people. Like the way that Brady is arguing here, he's arguing. I'm going to pull our faces back up here. He's essentially arguing that just because a theory exists and is widely accepted does not mean that it is either true or even good. And we can go through history and look at scientific theories that were accepted for long periods of time and then turned out to be false. Phlogiston,
yes.
Go ahead.
This is being paralleled in cosmology. So some
yes.
even really bright scientists, very respected. This could be foretelling what's going to happen in another far more major field, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean,
this could be prophetic, not just biological evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And
the thing,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, that could have very big implications on physics in general, and also our viewpoint of ourselves.
Yes. So let's go ahead and pull back to the Brady paper here. This paper is just the gift that keeps on giving. It really is. The amount of work credited to a theory is finally only a measure of how many people believe it. This standard works fine for historians who are estimating the historical importance of this or that theory, but has no bearing on the problem at hand. Consensus is a witness of convincing power, but not unless we owe the flat earthers an apology of truth. Okay, that one stings. Okay, so let me just explain what Brady did here. Now, first of all, he's making an incorrect assumption here because he's assuming that at one point flat Earth was the dominant cosmology. It never was. That's fiction. Okay? But he's comparing people who use consensus as a standard to flat earthers. Let that sink in and then think about evolutionary biology. And I know I have just triggered all the neo-Darwinists out there. But think about that. Think about what Brady just said. He is literally saying that if your argument is everybody believes it, you're like a flat earther. Okay, just let that sink into your brain. And this is not a creationist saying this. This is an evolutionist, right? This is a neo-Darwinist. Okay, just think about that. So let's pull back to the Brady paper here. The alternative seems to be a line of demarcation between good scientific theories and other speculations. But the attempt to use testability in this way with regard to natural selection came to grief in the preceding section. Now go watch last night's video if you want to see that. Yet whether natural selection is being tested or not, it certainly is being applied, and it is to these applications that its proponents will point when defending it. If a demarcation is to be found, it must be sought here. Two possibilities suggest themselves: the generation of new information and the extension of the theory's representative powers. And by new information here, it means that new knowledge, right? It's new knowledge for humanity. The first has no value for our intentions because it applies to all theories which generate research. So in other words, even a really bad theory will still generate new information, will still generate knowledge. Maybe useless knowledge, but it's still knowledge. The second is more interesting. The representative power of a theory is its ability to represent or explain the world in its terms, to form a picture of what the world would be like if the theory were true. A theory that cannot represent all of the relevant information after its own model is a non-starter. For one could not, if the theory failed to do this, even imagine it to be true. It would seem, therefore, that the ability of the theory to explain the known world and to extend such explanation to new information as it is discovered should provide scientific credentials for the theory. The problem at hand, however, concerns theories which are already in place and therefore already credentialed in this sense. Nor is it very conceivable that a generally accepted theory could exhibit any serious weakness in this area were that theory unfalsifiable. I'm not going to go there. Could evolutionary biologists, for example, ever lack for, quote, just so stories?
No.
Narrative scenarios which explain how it all happened after the fact. No mythology, belief system, etc. has ever been found wanting on this requirement. Ouch! Sal, did you want to have something you wanted to put in here? Because I thought you wanted to start saying something.
No.
Okay.
I'll just add, this is touching on cosmology, particularly inflation theory of the Big Bang. It never added anything to our understanding of reality. It just added more research to something that, many even Nobel Prize winners like Roger Penrose think it's just not true. Mm-hmm. But it's just amazing how, this happens if you accept something as an axiom and you try to work through all its implications. You can generate a lot. You can generate a lot of falsehoods on a false premise. No question about that.
Yep. If you ever watched any presentations by Dr. Jason Weil, he points out that if you can get one, if you allow one contradictory or false starting assumption, you can literally make the theory say anything. Right? If you allow just one contradiction, you can make it say anything. Right? So, moving back to Brady, because that's a valid point he's just made here. After the fact, in other words, after the fact, just so stories are easy for anything. Anybody can make up a story. Oort cloud, anyone? Anyways, what is the import then for the purpose of estimating theories of the extension of representation, i.e. new applications? When this activity is scrutinized, it seems to be nothing more than the discovery of what was already implicit in the theory itself. Such work investigates the theory rather than the world.
Yes.
Let me illustrate the point above. Go ahead, Sal.
Yes, that's real. And I got to emphasize this with electromagnetic theory, general relativity, and quantum mechanics. And I showed like a couple nights ago the basic laws of physics, the accepted form of them. Mm-hmm. They may be approximations, but they're very, very good. They could even be absolutely correct, but they're very good because they made predictions that turned out to describe the world when we could actually investigate it by experiment. It predicted what the experimental results were. And when I was in graduate school, early on, my very first course, we were tested on the 15 famous experiments that confirmed many predictions of physical theories that we now accept. And not only was it those isolated experiments, but it's the fact that when technologies had to account for them, and you could actually see it in the real world. So, for example, when we had electromagnetic theory, it predicted certain behaviors of how light would actually operate. And lo and behold, it's turned out that way. Amazing. We were able to make radios and wireless things. It's not just light, it extended in other areas. When quantum mechanics started to come about, we began to have the concept of photons. And that also had a huge impact. That's why we have things like lasers. So that is when that is how it says here, such work investigates the theory rather than the world. Really good theories make predictions about observations we'll make in the world of observations we haven't made yet, because maybe we don't have the experimental apparatus. But there were things with general relativity that were just amazing. It made predictions of what if we constructed a certain experiment, these are the values you would find. And we talked about one of them, which is the Mercury, regarding the Mercury orbits. And I put in the chat on our video yesterday, I did misstate a figure. I said 5 seconds over 250 years. It's actually 574 arc seconds per century, but it was in line with theory, amazingly. And that was a prediction. And then we had gravitational lensing. So here I go. I mean, I'm sharing all this because it's like, Sal, why do you reject evolutionary theory? I go to evolutionary theory. I'm just like, what predictions that are really astonishing does the theory make that excludes it, that would exclude other theories?
Right, exactly. Like what separates this from like
creationism and common design? You know,
exactly.
It's like I could say nested hierarchies fulfill this because it's common design. This is, yeah. I mean, they might say the same thing about creationism. What testable predictions? We can go there. We can go there. But I'm just saying, you compare scientific theories that emerged out of physics and chemistry, and then you go to evolutionary theory, and it's just appalling. It's like, what substance do you really have aside from the theory itself? I know that sounds kind of mean, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah. So, so we'll go ahead and pick up with the Brady paper here. Let me illustrate the point above. Maynard Smith points out. Hang on, let me just click back to the paper so y'all can see it. Maynard Smith points out in a passage quoted above that, quote, most organs can readily be understood as contributing to the survival and reproduction, and reminds us that were this not the case, Darwinism would never have been accepted in the first place. And again, we went through this last night. This logic doesn't work because they used vestigial organs as an argument for neo-Darwinism for over a century, and they're still using it in some textbooks. But at the same time, they're also saying, yeah, most organs can readily be understood as contributing to survival and reproduction. So which one is it? You can't have your cake and eat it too. The fact that these organs can be understood, represented in this way, is important, but it guarantees nothing more than the possibility of truth. As Smith implies when he mentions this aspect, the ability to represent the world is a necessary minimum for any theory, and thus we would not be considering the theory if it could not do so. Why Smith offers this as evidence in defense of a theory under attack, I do not know. Yet the attitude that the representative powers of the theory may be used to form a judgment not merely of the possibility, but of the actuality of the theory's coincidence with reality is widely shared. A recent textbook, Dobzhansky et al., 1977, the passage below is by Ayala, which is Francisco Ayala, offers the following in discussion of operational ways of measuring adaptation. Quote, Williams, 1966, has proposed that a useful criterion for identifying individual adaptations is whether an analogy can be established between some human artifact and the feature presumed to be an adaptation. A mammalian oviduct, I think that's, maybe is that a mammalian oviduct? I'm not sure what that word's supposed to be. Do you know that word, Sal? Because I don't. Mammalian? Whatever, it's an oviduct. May be seen as a mechanism for conveying the early embryo to the uterus. The uterus may be seen as designed for the protection and nourishment of the embryo. Ayala, 1968-1970, has suggested utility as a criterion for identifying adaptations. A feature of an organism is regarded as an adaptation if it has utility for the organism, and if such utility explains the presence of the feature. I don't know, that seems like a little bit of circular reasoning there.
But there is one part that is redeeming. It's when they can, if you can just scroll up just a little bit.
Sure, let me scroll up just a touch. We go. That enough?
Williams proposed that a useful criterion for identifying individual adaptations is whether an analogy can be established between some human artifact. That is biophysics right there. Now, what it tries to do in biophysics, we don't try to describe everything in biology, but there are major systems, anything that's sensory or locomotive or involving navigation or computation or networks or error correction or information processing. These can be described by and we don't use even the word adaptation. We talk about optimality in terms of what is physically possible. So a good example is geometric optics. We use geometric optics to build telescopes or whatever. We can tell if something's in focus. Geometric optics is something that is like one of the oldest disciplines in physics, very well established. It's either in focus or not. We have a criteria for establishing if light waves are focused. We don't have to use natural selection. So that is an example where we can actually take a human artifact, so to speak, and compare it to to the eyes in various creatures. In Biolek, and I uploaded Biolek's lecture, and he was describing other aspects of geometric optics you might not think of. And the insect eyes with the multiple eyes, that's actually the optimal way to implement an eye for a creature that small. And he goes into great length explaining why the insect eye is built that way versus the human eye. And it was rather astonishing. It's like these are all optimized in terms of physical principles of processing light. Anyone who I actually did work in the field of optics because I worked for the Army Night Vision Labs. And there are whole societies that study this. So when the engineers see these things in biological creatures, they wonder, and they actually have the real expertise it takes to judge whether it is optimal or not, which is more than I can say for evolutionary biologists like Jerry Coyne, who say the human eye is badly designed. Totally has no clue. He has no clue what he's talking about. And it's still in his textbooks, even after the physicists have shown what he said was ridiculous about the so-called backward wiring of the retina. Total buffoonery. And that's why, see, now I get a little bit red and my blood pressure goes up because the stupidity that is promoted by people that don't know what they're talking about is still accepted.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It infuriates me that people will come out and say stuff like this without ever looking at it. They'll just say, oh yeah, well, somebody else said it, so it's good. Well, no, it's not. So anyway, and Coyne, by the way, is one of the worst offenders in this regard. Some of the, because I'm reading slowly but surely working through his book, Why Evolution is True. And like the arguments are not good arguments. Most of them are good arguments.
Let me hammer this a little more. I talked to someone who is a physics student, physics student or electrical engineer. He works with electromagnetic theory and waveguides. I described some of the characteristics of the processing in the so-called bad design of a backward retina. And I said, these components of that include a waveguide. He said, oh my goodness, that is really good engineering. He said that was his specialty. His professional specialty is designing electromagnetic waveguides. He said it has to be very exacting proportions to be able to be a waveguide. And I'm like, yeah, Coyne has no clue what he's talking about. He has no business saying it's a bad design. The biophysicists have basically blown him away. And that's why I also like biophysics, is they actually have objective criteria for saying if a sensory organ is optimal in its construction, because the reason they can even say that is we have the same problem in building telescopes or sensory systems for like night vision or whatever. We have the body of knowledge to evaluate, because when we're trying to select vendors that are building this device or that device, we can say, okay, we know what the limits of physics are. Let's see whether you can do this cost effectively and how well your device is. We actually have objective criteria. Someone like Coyne is just appealing to his own aesthetical sense. He has no clue. And it just makes me mad that this is promoted as some sort of science. And so not only is it bad science, it's bad science that has other theories that actually show it's bad science, and it's not admitted into their clique to say, oh, Jerry Coyne, what evolutionary biologist is going to publish on this and say, hey, we need to make a major retraction. We need to criticize Jerry Coyne. He's one of ours. We're going to criticize him. because he said something stupid. That doesn't happen.
No. If you did that, particularly as an up and coming evolutionary biologist, you'd lose your job. It's just how it works. Unfortunately, they circle the wagons and protect their own. So anyway, but yeah, so I appreciate Sal going on that rant, so I didn't have to. But it was a good rant though, because it's important we understand like that this is not. They don't play the game by fair rules. They play the game by we're going to say whatever we want to say, and then you have to. It's essentially what they do in debates. They spew a bunch of garbage, and then you have to try to clean it up.
Brandolini's law.
Exactly. Yep. Brandolini's law. They spew garbage and then force you to clean it up. So, anyway, this is why, by the way, you read the peer-reviewed literature because it's a little bit harder to spew garbage in the peer-reviewed literature, and they actually criticize each other in the peer-reviewed literature. Since the author is trying to show at this point in the text that natural selection is neither circular nor tautologous, the passage seems oddly misdirected. I thought I recognized circular reasoning at the end of that passage. By the turn of the 19th century, it was quite clear that organisms seemed teleologically constructed, i.e. their features looked goal-directed or designed for specific purposes, one of which was always the continuity of the organism. This sounds like the Richard Dawkins quote. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. And that would be on page 1 of one of his books. Probably not the best way to admit that if you're trying to argue that there's actually no design. But Dawkins admitted it, so he will be quoted for eternity for it. So, moving on. See, this structure of appearances was appealed to as evidence of intelligent creation and was one of the problem elements that would have to be explained by any theory of origins which did not invoke intelligent purpose. Darwin met the challenge through an analogy of intelligence. The action of natural selection approximates the action of an intelligent breeder. Given this history, however, the programs for, quote, identifying adaptations above seem little more than exercises in definition. Consider, for example, the following points are part of Darwin's argument. 1. Organisms exhibit goal-directed features. 2. The action of natural selection, seen as analogous to that of a breeder, can account for this. If we add to these the following definition, features which are supposed to have been evolved through this action are termed adaptations, then we must agree that 4. The goal-directed features of organisms recognized by analogy to human artifact or by the impression of utility are adaptations. But since this follows by definition, being simply the new name given to goal-directed appearance by our theory, we have made no empirical advance over pre-Darwinian biology through this extension of theory.
Well said.
In other words,
pre-Darwinian
this explains nothing.
Yeah. Yep.
This explains zero, nada. It means nothing. They haven't advanced biology one iota. And by the way, that's an evolutionist saying that, not me. I'll read the sentence again. But since this follows by definition, being simply the new name given to goal-directed appearances by our theory, we have made no empirical advance over pre-Darwinian biology through this extension of theory. The only empirical observations made were practically identical with pre-Darwinian ones used to identify the appearance of goal-directedness. In other words, if you define natural selection and adaptation the way Ayala did, you advance biology nothing. You are literally at the same place you were before Darwin.
And by the way, just the pre-Darwinian, that was actually pretty good. We're not saying that it's bad that we're making the machine analogy. I'm not saying it anyway, personally.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, the machine analogy is fine. That's not the issue. The point is you're not actually getting anywhere.
Exactly. And did you explain its origin?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
Right. The existence of the fittest is never under question. The question is, how did they get there?
Yeah.
And none of this explains that. Does that make sense? Hopefully
Yep.
it makes sense to everybody. I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat. Hopefully that is making sense to everyone. But like, I'm sorry, but like, this is, if you want to argue that way, fine. But it's garbage. It's vapid. It's empty. It's meaningless. And you've held biology back for 160 years. Is enough yet? Anyway. Williams and Ayala are exploring what their theory means. Their mode of operationalizing their concepts represents the world according to their model, but produces no test of the model. They have assumed that goal-directed appearances are Darwinian adaptations, but the argument offers no evidence for the truth of this assumption. I said at the beginning of this paper that fruitfulness could only be measured in terms of the user's intent. A theory that is too indeterminate to be seriously tested, however, can only serve to picture the world rather than investigate it. The picture is, predictably, generally applicable, for the very lack of determination that prevents serious testing also assures that the pictures can be stretched to fit all circumstances. And the picture is compelling. It has become a ubiquitous belief in wider circles than the scientific community. It is only human to wish to extend belief, and by doing so to make the world more understandable. People of all ages have done as much. But is there no distinction to be made between scientific investigation and the extension of belief? Lewontin, 1972, clearly thought there was. Quote, "For what good is a theory that is guaranteed by its internal logical structure to agree with all conceivable observations irrespective of the real structure of the world? If scientists are going to use logically unbeatable theories about the world, they might as well give up natural science and take up religion." That is a blast from Lewontin. He's not mincing words at all.
Well, if I could,
Go ahead.
I showed earlier Fisher's fundamental theorem of natural selection. In a make-believe world, those equations are accurate. I mean, that's an example of something that is, it's internal. It has internal logic structure, and it is correct mathematically. So when I show those equations, those are correct equations. When I said the math is garbage, it's not garbage because the derivations mathematically are wrong. It's that it's not applicable to the real world. That's biology's central theorem. It was unassailable in terms of the math, but it was assailable in terms of its description of reality. And so, that's the difference between the equations of physics. They are both internally logical, but they describe in good order, or maybe even perfectly, the world we live in.
And this is the big difference between a mathematical formulation and a practical application.
Yes.
Just because the math explains something does not mean it has any practical value in the real world.
Exactly. And actually, the funny thing is, when you get into the more advanced math and you get to meet some of the advanced mathematicians who actually have worked a little bit in the real world, some of their advanced math, they take exception if you find an application in the real world. So it is kind of a religion on its own, but it is beautiful in that it has internal logic, and that was kind of a little bit of the title of a recent paper. It was a beautiful theory indeed. It was fitness maximization, but then it fell apart. So Lewontin here, again, first-rate mind, absolutely a first-rate mind that he could make the distinction. We built this huge mathematical edifice. It's internally logical. All the derivations are generally correct, but it doesn't describe the world. It doesn't describe the real world. It is a religion, and that's what I saw in population genetics. Aspects of some of it is really good, okay, but some of it is described by that paragraph.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Now I'm going to reread that because the next sentence makes a whole lot more sense when you listen to what Lewontin just said. So we're going to reread that, And then we're going to read the next sentence from Brady and watch the chat meltdown. Because it's whew. For what good is a theory that is guaranteed by its internal logic structure to agree with all conceivable observations, irrespective of the real structure of the world? If scientists are going to use logically unbeatable theories about the world, they might as well give up natural science and take up religion. Now, that's Lewontin. Listen to what Brady says. Of course, to make sense of this remark, one must agree that there is a difference between those two institutions.
Yes.
Brady literally just called science religion. Now, Brady himself may not agree with that, but he's definitely pointing to the fact that there are people who treat science like religion. And there's quite a few of those. Also, greeting to Raman. Thank you for showing up. Sorry, I can't let you do super stickers. YouTube won't let me. Sorry about that, man.
Yeah, we don't have enough subscribers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can save it up for when we cross 1,000.
Yeah. So let's pull back to Brady here real quick. But I mean that is devastating. That quote from Lewontin and then Brady's follow up. It's like, oh.
Well, if I could
go ahead.
I don't think he's calling natural science a religion.
No, I don't think he is either. But I think
he's talking about these theories that are unfalsifiable,
right? That
are just accepted, and it's like, and he talked about irrespective of the real structure of the world, it'll agree with all conceivable observations, just like the crow sitting on a pile of manure, and the farmer says it's going to rain or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
That theory will agree with all conceivable observations. It's logically consistent, but it's not really natural science.
Yep.
And I'll even say it's not even religion.
No, because there are some things that would be inconsistent with a particular religious belief.
Exactly.
Whereas there is literally nothing that would be inconsistent with it either rain or it won't rain.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and go ahead and pick up where with that is. We'll continue on with that. I apologize. So where'd we go with this? Sorry, I clicked away from it to change the screen and lost it. There we go. Here we go. In what may be an uncharacteristic slip, Lewontin, 1978, has provided me with a good example of the manner in which the Darwinian view exerts a metaphysical compulsion on our thought. Concluding a discussion of apparent untestability of adaptation, he writes, adaptation is a real phenomenon. The problem of locomotion in an aquatic environment is a real problem that has been solved by many totally unrelated evolutionary lines in much the same way. Therefore, it must be feasible to make adaptive arguments about swimming appendages. And this in turn means that the nature of the ceteris paribus assumption must be workable. So in other words, Lewontin has just finished arguing that, adaptation, we're not sure what it is, but it's real and it's evolutionary. Let me go on. The evidence cited in this passage consists of observations made before the theory was formulated. Lewontin seems to be saying that when the theory was offered to explain such evidence, it was already known to be true, for he seems to assume that these observations can be explained in no other way. Well, if natural selection is the only thing that could possibly be behind the known structure of organisms, we do not need further test. We need not, in fact, have any concern with testing at all, for we already know the answers, the truth being manifest from the beginning. Peters, 1976, concludes that, quote, that we are, quote, in danger from an evolutionary metaphysic in which the logical Darwinian devices have become great empirical truths. Perhaps this is why the defenders of natural selection have so often missed the point of the criticism. The defenders already know that organisms evolved by natural selection, and they have difficulty realizing that the critics might not know. So in other words, basically, the defenders of natural selection are already like, yep, everything evolved by natural selection. And the critics are going, wait a minute, you haven't demonstrated that. And the response from the critics is, hey, we got this. We have, with everything evolved by natural selection. But that's the question. Did it actually happen? Oh, yeah, that's exactly what happened. That is literally what we're looking at here, guys. And I mean, I'm not trying to be harsh with these folks, but that's how this whole thing is structured. All right. Again, hopefully this is making sense to everybody. But like this whole thing is structured around the defenders saying, hey, you know, everything evolved by natural selection. We know this. And the people who are asking the questions going, no, we don't actually know that. And the defenders going, well, yeah, everything evolved by natural selection. It's all good. It's all good. Moving on, user's intent. 21st page, folks. We're almost done. I have emphasized in the preceding sections the case for the prosecution because I wanted to make it clear that there was a case. The indeterminacy that clouds organism-environment relations is a crucial ignorance which effectively prevents the researcher from advancing further than the stage of representation. The concepts cannot be operationalized in a fashion determinate enough to afford a test. In other words, natural selection can't be tested. Of course, all this could change with future discoveries, but for the moment, the limitation is clear. The critics are right about that. On the other hand, this is not to say that it must follow that natural selection is a bad or unscientific theory. Such a decision rests, as always, with the intent of the person who uses the theory. While writing this paper, I was reminded that the criticism offered here would fit a great deal of science, not all of it biological. I must agree, so it would. But is this a definitive consideration? I take it that the critics of natural selection who got around to studying other theories would advance the same critique there if it applied. As Macbeth's argument on the, quote, best in the field fallacy points out, the fact that a theory proves to be as good or even better than other theories only means that we have a basis for choosing between these theories, but it says nothing about whether any of them are good. Natural selection is less determinate than some theories, but certainly as applicable as many others. I never meant to argue that there was a consensus in the scientific community that indeterminacy was a disqualifying criterion. Rather, I wanted to suggest that the mere fact of consensus was not enough to base our judgment on. Right? And so here he's kind of going into damage control mode. He's kind of going, okay, I've ripped natural selection. I've ripped the way that the whole thing works. I've ripped the scientific edifice. How do I put it all back together before I submit my paper so that my paper actually gets published? I mean, not to be rude, but that is that's essentially what he's doing here. And unfortunately, we see this quite a bit in the Darwinian worldview where they'll do this. So we return to the purpose of the researcher. What does he want? What does he or she want from the theory? The theory does provide a rational explanation of appearances in terms of understandable mechanisms. If this is all that is desired, natural selection can meet the demand. If, on the other hand, the simple models of adaptation have run into trouble with almost all predictable regularity, I mean models of optimization, not mere selective pressure, as Smith admits. If the researcher wants to investigate the process by which fitness is optimized, I'm afraid the picture is rather unpromising. Good empirical investigation for many researchers, and certainly for the critics I have been reading, demands some sort of testing. The theory manifests an inadequacy here. It is not testable and should not be defended as such. Hear that again, folks. The theory manifests an inadequacy here. It is not testable and should not be defended as such. What theory is he talking about, folks? It's natural selection. Natural selection in the terms of quantifying fitness is completely untestable. Now, what do you think that means for evolutionary biology? We'll come back to that question, but I want to lay it out there right now. Let's just think about that as we read through the rest of the paper. What does it mean for evolutionary biology that natural selection, in terms of determining the fitness of organisms, is completely untestable? Right? Just lay that out. Lay that question out there as we read through the rest of the paper, because we're almost done. Right? And remember, I didn't say this. Sal didn't say this, although we agree. RH Brady said this. Right? Since the theory has difficulties, perhaps it should not receive such emphasis. there are alternative questions open to the researcher. The actual discovery of the patterns of nature may not necessitate a theory of their mechanism. The discovery of the natural system and taxonomy did not depend upon a speculation on the mechanism by which the system came about, but Darwin's speculation on mechanism drew heavily on what was already known of that system. Darwin's thesis would have been impossible without the advances made by pre-Darwinian taxonomy, particularly with regard to the concept of common plan. In other words, nested hierarchy.
Okay, so when they say that the nested hierarchy proves evolution, it's like, no, that's a pre-Darwinian conception, buddy.
Yep.
Amen.
Yep. Nested hierarchy was already a thing, already pre-built into biology long before Darwin. Darwin didn't invent it. Darwin didn't predict it. It already existed.
I hope he has a reference for this, because that's devastating.
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at Linnaeus and you've got a nested hierarchy.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
Yeah. It's an observation. Evolutionary theory doesn't, it may predict certain nested hierarchies, but I'm pointing out this is a separate discussion. The nested hierarchy in biology cannot be explained by mere common descent, particularly for what I call poofomorphies, things that have no ancestor.
Yep. We
have all these orphan systems that are taxonomically restricted that just kind of come out of nowhere. I mean, you might be able to, like, say, organismally say it's still by common descent, but you need these little poofs of miracles,
right? Yep.
To make certain orphan systems. I'm not talking about just a single gene. If I showed the diagram of an insulin regulating system, you're like, a Darwinist might just take the single insulin molecule and say, okay, we can build a phylogeny on this. But then when you see all the other parts that connect to it, you're like, yeah, that does look like kind of a poof.
And the other problem is, if you build a phylogeny based on a single gene, you can literally make those phylogenies based on any gene you want, and they'll come out differently.
Yeah. So this was another gem here.
Yep.
Pre-Darwinian taxonomy on common plan.
Yep. A branching diagram of taxonomic information may display a pattern of relations that owes nothing to the speculative mechanisms of natural selection, but which could prove to be of crucial value in investigating the world.
Yes,
folks,
and
ancestry is not.
A lot of researchers in the ID community now are starting to work on that, and I'm glad to have been kind of in the early part. I have alluded to it on my website in the when I was talking about the stairways to understanding, because the patterns of similarity and diversity in the nested hierarchy are optimizing scientific discovery in ways that are not predicted by evolutionary theory.
Right. A branching diagram of taxonomic information may display a pattern of relations that owes nothing to the speculative mechanisms of natural selection, but which could prove to be of crucial value in investigating the world. Such patterns are themselves theories of a sort. They make predictions, they are testable, they are highly determinable by observation. They do not, of course, tell us about the mechanisms, at least not immediately. But this represents an advantage, for we are not so likely to generate a pattern from our theoretical mechanism rather than from our observations if we have no theoretical mechanism. Perhaps many researchers simply do not need natural selection to investigate their part of the world. Did you hear that, folks? Perhaps many researchers do not need natural selection to investigate their part of the world. It would be interesting to find out whether this were so. Candid readers must decide for themselves. I think we know the answer to that one, folks. And we'll kind of wrap up here in a little bit here because we're hitting the summary. So we're almost done. We are almost done. Natural selection has demonstrated its ability to represent the world in its terms and compel belief. It has been crucially important historically in that it was instrumental in the conversion of the biological community to evolutionary thought. But until the organism can be theoretically reduced to determinate laws, the theory is too incomplete to be testable. Applications of the theory, therefore, tell us more about the theory than the world, and do not serve the purpose of efficiently investigating the latter. When confusion between test and application is eliminated, the present dialogue on the merit of the theory may emerge from the miasma of miscommunication, and the theory's value for various intentions be clearly estimated. Given that the stated purpose of most research is the investigation of the world, it may be that until such time as a complete theory is put forward, the effort expended on applications of natural selection would be best spent elsewhere, either in other research or in the attempt to formulate a more workable theory to replace Darwin's speculation.
Bravo. Bravo, RH Brady.
First of all, ouch. Second of all, double ouch. Third, wow. That paper is mind-boggling. It is shocking that a Darwinist would write that paper. It is absolutely stunning. Darwinists do not write those kind of papers. They just don't. But this guy did.
Yeah, I don't see that level of intellect in a lot of evolutionary literature.
No.
Piercing,
No.
very piercing, very insightful.
Yeah. And showed a willingness to acknowledge that people outside the field have figured this out. In quoting, I believe it was Bethel that he quoted.
A journalist, Bethel, and Macbeth, an attorney. Mm-hmm. And sometimes calling the emperor has no clothes. Mm-hmm. You need an outsider.
Yep. And he also, if you read the acknowledgments here, he acknowledges Norman Macbeth specifically for bringing my attention to the problem in the first place and for many conversations on the subject.
And I gave an example of outsiders criticizing evolutionary theory, but then evolutionary theory collectively pretending it's not there. That was in regard to the backward wiring of the retina. Jerry Coyne saying how badly the human eye is designed. The physicists do not feel that way. Mm-hmm. And that's why I am encouraged by the involvement of physicists now in this new field of biophysics, which is miserably difficult, like a lot of physics fields.
Yeah.
I have Biolek's book. I'm just like, this is painful book. It was written for his PhD students, and it is brutal. And I'm like, gee, I thought some of my physics courses were bad. And I looked at that book. I think I would crawl if I were in his classes. But the community collectively, both the engineers and the biophysicists, have offered indirect criticism of evolutionary theory and say, you can't keep saying this is bad design because it kicks our rear ends because it's built so well. We can't build devices like this. And yet they are still making the same tired old assertion. Look how stupid this was. I keep hearing it.
Uh-huh. Because if they don't belittle the design in nature, they may have to admit to a designer.
Yeah.
And that would be unconscionable.
Yeah. The thought that biology is engineered in ways that are superior to our modern technology, which can put man on the moon, make space probes, make supercomputers, make transistors, make all sorts of synthetic type chemicals. The thought that it is done better in biology, I can see why that would be unsettling, and they don't want to admit it. How much evolutionary literature do I see saying, oh, we need to even something mild saying we need to change our paradigm and stop saying biology is clumsy and wasteful and blundering, which is to quote Darwin's words, because that's the sentiment of Coyne. Is he going to retract now? Is he going to change his tune?
Nope. Also, welcome, Patrick. Glad you could join us tonight. We actually just finished up the Brady paper, and so at this point, we're kind of just going through a summary and kind of talking through some thoughts on natural selection, evolutionary biology, and so on.
Welcome, Patrick. Just so you know why this had happened, we had some problems on my channel technically, but then I said I'd like to get Emory some more subscribers. So I told Pat, I said, hey, come join us on Emory's channel tonight. So just wanted to let you know, I tried to get you another viewer.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. I mean, Patrick, you're familiar with me, so you know that like I'm a wee bit more explosive than Sal. Although I think Sal's had the bigger rant tonight than I did. But I'm a little bit more explosive than Sal, but I'm not quite on John Maddox's level. So that's kind of where I'm at. So welcome to the channel. Thank you for coming out. And yes, the Brady paper is 1000% relevant. Yes, it's a bit of an older paper. It's from 1979, so it is a little bit older. But every criticism that he makes in this paper is completely relevant today. I can't think of anything he said in that paper that is not still true of natural selection.
Yeah, or a lot of other theories like inflation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I mean that's the physics brain in Sal is, they're going to, hey, what about the inflation? What about this cosmology problem that also does the exact same thing? And like, again, as I said last night, like, I don't have a problem with natural selection, environmental influence. I don't have a problem with that, but it cannot do the things that the evolutionary biologists want it to do.
Can we unshare the screen briefly?
Sure, that's fine. We can drop back to this.
Oh, good. I feel like we can we can have a conversation now.
Yeah.
I actually last night reviewed our video almost from start to finish again. So I was up till about 4 a.m. and I was pondering what we said, and I made some notes. Because that paper was just immense to digest. And because I'd rather be able to criticize evolutionary theory without having to go through 21 pages.
Right, yeah.
And so I was thinking of ways it could be done more efficiently, and then adding some more thoughts.
Right.
But do you have any thoughts? And I'll start reading through my notes here.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Now I'll jump in as I hear things I want to talk about. So,
okay, I learned a new buzz phrase, ceteris paribus. Now I can sound educated because I can use a Latin phrase. So that was just one that's of no consequence.
Yeah. Just as a side note, I learned that today that Darwin himself used that phrase. I was reading his papers on his writings on sexual selection, and he uses that phrase to explain that, hey, this is what's going to happen if everything else is the same. So cool. It's been around for a while. So
and then just some corrections I talked about. I said Darwin's chapter on organs of extreme perfection and complication. I said it's chapter 4, which is 4 in Roman numerals is IV. It's actually chapter 6, which is VI. I had a dyslexic moment there. I don't know. It just bothers me if I state something and someone repeats it. I need to try to correct it if it's a mistake. I've been thinking of a way, they use the word arrival of the fittest as a criticism of natural selection. I've been still thinking of a way to frame the problem, because every way that I framed the problem with selection and how it's applied has never been succinct. I would say, keeping something or maintaining something is not the same as creating something.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's like, well, what does that have to do with anything? So let's take the topoisomerase enzyme. It's very important. The reason it's studied so much, just tremendous amounts of literature on one enzyme. People have spent their careers on it. There are like huge conferences that last for a week on the topoisomerase enzyme. Why is that? It is critical to our current form of chemotherapy. If we disrupt the operation of topoisomerase, we start to kill cells. And the idea is, if we can kill more cancer cells than non-cancerous cells, this is kind of a scorched earth last defense to save someone's life. We're literally just burning down our own cities to win the war, so to speak, figuratively speaking. And so the reason we can disrupt that enzyme and have such a tremendous effect on killing cells is it's critical. So an evolutionist will say, hey, natural selection selects that, therefore natural selection evolved it. I've heard informally as much. So you say, oh, there's so much selection for that feature. That's proof of that. I hear that illogic. It's unbelievable. And it's like, okay, we could turn this around. If it's life critical and it didn't exist, that means selection couldn't work at all. Did you ever think about that? Because the creature would be dead. You can't select for something dead. And yes, on Reddit, someone did argue you can. Okay, just that's what you get in the internet sphere. Oh goodness. Sorry. Sometimes you make such a good point, and they'll just, they just keep on to save face. They'll say something even more stupid.
Yep, that's pretty common.
But I wanted to point that out. They'll say a selection's so obvious. Look at that. You just knock that out and the creature dies. That proves selection involved it. I mean, superficially, you wouldn't, why do we criticize that today as ID proponents and creationists? Michael Behe began to point out the illogic of it. And, granted, we have the thing with the bacterial flagellum, but I argue now, let's look at proteins that are life critical. They'll say, well, then that's an abiogenesis thing. I'll say, okay, so there are features in biology that natural selection can't explain. That's at least a start. That you have to, throw it on those poor beleaguered abiogenesis researchers who aren't going to solve the problem anyway either. You'll just say it's not my problem. Evolutionary theory works so well in natural selection for other features. And then it's like, okay, this is Brandolini's law again. They could just throw something out, and I'm going to work a year to be finding these systems, studying cell biology textbooks, working with protein biologists, structural biologists, and we're going to come up with something good. And they'll come up with some clever things to say, and we just have to refine our argument a little bit. Like they'll say, oh, you don't really need topoisomerase to live. And I'd say, okay, then how do you get natural selection to select for it? Because there are things like a phage that has a single strand of DNA and it's all crumpled, but you can argue a phage isn't even living. But I wanted to say that's how I've seen. That was something that Brady didn't cover. That you get the impression you have a real theory, because you could do these knockout experiments and say selection is so strong for this, selection must have evolved it. And they never think that, okay, if it's that strong, that means it's life critical.
Mm-hmm.
How do you account for it then?
Right.
And so I just want,
And see, that's a huge problem, right? Just because something exists does not mean, just because there is strong selective pressure to keep something in place doesn't mean that the selection is what put it there. All it means is that the selection keeps it there.
Keeps it. So this whole thing of arrival of the fittest. But that illogic is, people that I argue with, and, we can get some evolutionary biologists maybe to even fess up that that's what they would say, that, okay, there's strong selection pressure for this because it's lethal without it. Therefore, selection evolved it. That's almost in Darwin's thinking if you see it. And even in Richard Dawkins' book, he's talking about the hemoglobin. He said it, that's where he made his weasel simulation where you can build things incrementally. And Michael Behe kind of did a very good job of criticizing that. Now, I don't like using the word irreducible complexity. You add an abstraction you don't need. It's better to just work with tangible things, individual systems, than trying to make these generalizations. Because when Behe he appeared on Dr. Cardinel's show, Creation Myths. I was like, Mike, don't do this. You're spending half the time trying to argue and solidify your definitions and talk about all the exceptions. You never actually, you could have spent 45, instead of the 45 minutes talking about all the exceptional cases, why don't you talk about systems and That's the only reason I say I don't want to argue the concept of irreducible complexity. I want to put real systems in and say, okay, let's, for the sake of argument, say the other things evolved by natural selection. I can give you a few things that don't. And why don't we start there? So,
that's a great.
That was probably my main point, is that they'll say, oh, it's testable. You just knock this out and it dies. And they use that as proof. And I felt that might have been leveled at Brady's otherwise very fine paper. But like he said, future discoveries may help us. Right. And so I have a few more things in my notes, because if I had too many notes, then I'm going to have a Brady paper. I want to be succinct. Did you have some more thoughts?
No, I think that's what you just said is really, really good. Because the illogic of saying, well, this thing exists, but if you take it away, the organism dies. Therefore, natural selection must have put it there. No, that doesn't follow logically. It could have gotten there any number of ways. Selection is just keeping it there.
Selection is key. So what that's what I said. The long way of saying this: selection for maintaining an existing system in the present day does not imply selection for evolution of that system in the past, right, when it did not yet exist. But that's long-winded, and I'm trying to make, how it is when you can be really terse. And I've been working on this for a year. I've been thinking, how can I say this more succinctly and clearly? So arrival of the fittest is kind of close to it. But, I want to say keeping is not the same as creating something. That's about, that's maybe the starting phrase. Having something is not the same thing as creating something. Right. Maybe that's a better word. Having something is not the same as creating it. And then I can...
Yeah. The existence of something doesn't explain its origin.
Yeah.
Or you just simplify that down even further to existence does not explain origin.
Hey! Good on you. Good on you. And then hi, Nicholas. The machines of... I was pointing out that even machines have finite life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's adapted to its purpose. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it was maladapted.
Right.
Now, in biotic message, God bless.
Can I just give an illustration here real quick? Then you can talk about the biotic message, because I actually like the biotic message. So, so I worked previously for a company that made and packaged vitamins. That's what I did. And the machines we had were past their shelf life. They were old. They were very old, and they didn't really work great. But they worked. And that was what the company cared about, because they just wanted to make money, which you understand. But those machines would have fared very, very... They did well enough to package vitamins. They would have fared very, very poorly if we had tried to make them package meat. And the point being, machines are only designed to do certain things. And this application spins over into organismal biology. Organisms are only designed to do certain things. Sal's example of a blue whale in the desert. It doesn't belong there. Right? And if you take a desert mouse and drop it into the ocean, it ain't going to do too well either. So the point being, organismal design is limited. The design is not universal. It won't fit everywhere. It'll only work certain places. So go ahead, Sal.
Okay, so this is the pre-Darwinian conception, and actually biotic message, whether unwittingly or not, had recapitulated the pre-Darwinian conception of the purpose of biology. Mm-hmm. Because that's interesting. It looks purposeful.
Right.
And so at least prior to that, and the one good thing about the PBS documentary on evolution was it highlighted that. It said before Darwin, the purpose, these creatures were made, it's the peacock's tail, because they had a episode on sexual selection, and they commented that it made Darwin sick to see that. And it was problematic for him, because the peacock's tail represented, the problem of the peacock's tail represented the pre-Darwinian view of nature, that it was created to make men wonder at their creator. And you look at the peacock's tail. And the biotic message has that, plus a little more. It's not exactly that. It said, first off, it's designed to reproduce and survive. So it survives in the sense that it can at least reproduce. But it is designed in a way that it resists naturalistic explanations, meaning the normal operation of nature, that its origin could not have been natural. And added to that, and this is a little bit beyond the biotic message, it has that wow factor, which we're finding now. When I describe the quote unquote backward wired retina in terms of its features as waveguides to an electromagnetic researcher who specializes in waveguides, he was like, wow. When quantum spin chemistry, magnetic compasses based on quantum spin chemistry are presented to a top chemist like Marcus Eberlin, say, wow. So even a physicist like William Biolek, who's by no means a creationist, he gives an entire lecture, a memorial lecture to a Nobel Prize winning physicist by the name of Hans Bethe. What does he talk about? The title of his talk is More Perfect Than We Imagined. More perfect than we imagined. Because it has that wow factor. And so what is the purpose of biology? It's to make men wonder at their creator. And it's very well adapted to that in the sense that Rube Goldberg machines or any device where you're trying to make someone go, wow, it's adapted to that in the sense that it's able to it's able to navigate the restraints of physics and operate many times right at their limit. But when it can do that in ways that we can't, even with our technology, that's the real wow. It's like, we can't do that. And having been in the aviation industry, in the saga of building a flying machine, when we could see birds, and for thousands of years, we wanted to do the same, how difficult it was. You know, we had to learn things like Bernoulli's principles. I should know this, but I've long since forgotten. But the idea of how an airfoil is made and all the difficulties of controlling a flying machine, you know, at least we can say we've exceeded birds in some respects. We can fly higher and faster, but there's still things that they do that are still, you're just like, wow, to do that at that limit. You know, we tried to make a hummingbird imitation, and we couldn't make a really good hummingbird the way that it used its wings.
Right.
That sort of contraption. And that was in the video by Illustra Media Flight. And being from the aerospace industry, I was just like, you know, my jaw was just dropping. I said, wow. And that's also where I learned about the Arctic tern that flies 40,000 miles. Having been a pilot, I'm just like, yeah, if I only had a magnetic compass and I had no maps, I don't know how they could do it. Every aviator I know needs maps to know how they get from here to there. Mm-hmm. How did they record things in their head? You know?
Right. Yeah. How do they know that?
Absolutely. You know, if I talked among my aviation buddies, they could tell you this is totally amazing. They could tell you, and anyone in, I work for the Center for Advanced Aviation Systems, and they had a whole department on navigation and surveillance, and the whole Department of Navigation, we examined these things. And, I'm really sorry I didn't have a chance to meet other creationists in the navigation and surveillance department, because we could have a really nice talk and say, look, we have all these engineers working their lifetime, and lots of them on the navigation problem. And look, the monarch butterfly and the Arctic tern have solved it. They can do point-to-point navigation for thousands of miles. They don't have GPS. They're using the technology we would least want to use, which is magnetic fields. What we prefer to do is to, like before GPS, we would build these huge radio transmission stations, and we'd build radio navigation. Mm-hmm. And then we had all these other things with stellar navigation. I was looking at this and just like, yeah, This took thousands of years to develop, like intercontinental navigation. A lot of people died in the seas because they couldn't navigate and get themselves back home. And somehow these creatures have the ability. And this is thousands of years of science to get even a little bit. And so what do we do now? We throw up satellites with high technology and put them up there, and then we can use, we have, that implements the GPS. But still, these little creatures outdo us because we need rocket ships and space technology. They don't. People don't realize that GPS technology, we couldn't do it if we didn't have rocket science and orbital mechanics and all these other technologies. They're able to circumvent that, and we don't know how they do it.
Yep, and I mean, where you pointed out that we've exceeded birds in some respects. Yes, we have, but not as efficiently.
Yeah,
not anywhere close to as efficiently.
Yeah, see, and that's why some of these evolutionists will say, "Look, we can do this so much better." I'm just like, but there are other aspects that you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And James Tour, even at the very basal level, even some of the chemicals, we can't do that. And he was showing like, oh, we can't make a pentose. 90 pages of characterization, it still didn't get, even to make the very core of the DNA, the ribose, which is a pentose class carbohydrate. And he said our best synthetic chemists can't do that. So I talked about the biotic message, and in Brady's paper, they briefly alluded to absolute fitness, and I noticed you had a video on absolute versus relative
yes,
fitness. When something goes extinct, its absolute fitness goes to zero.
Yep.
You don't really see that captured in population genetic literature. But natural selection between entire species, we could be saying if we're having major biological forms that are going extinct from the biosphere via quote unquote natural selection, that doesn't bode well for the theory. But they formulate the theory in a way that little scenario is not accounted for. And I actually did try to lobby John Sanford to say, can we add this idea of random extinction? He said, nah, I kind of like, self-destruction better.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So my genetic entropy 2.0 would include not just self-destruction. I'd talk about forced destruction. So genetic entropy, as formulated by John Sanford, is really the self-destruction of the genome. Now, there was an interesting... did you get my email on the fruit fly experiment?
I did. I have not had a chance to read all of it yet, but I did get it.
Yeah, the abstract should be informative. And we could see why they began to think natural selection so nice, because they actually didn't study the genomes. They were just counting. That was a good lesson on kind of the circular reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main reason I sent it to you, not is if there's anything profound, except to say how profoundly bad the theory is. It accorded very much. It showed exactly what Brady was talking about. So what they did is they had these fruit flies. Again, it's in a coddled environment because it's laboratory. And they throw radiation at it. And they say, oh, the fitness increased. It's making more offspring. These were done in the 50s before they're able to do gene sequencing. And then even up until the 80s, even Ayala was saying, this is really cool. He said the fitness increased as we keep throwing radiation at it. And the reason I pointed that out, now in the present day, we might actually see that the genome is just being blown apart, and yet the fitness keeps increasing. But they thought this was some great empirical discovery that you could, you're putting the population under stress and you're making it make more babies. And they said, here, this proves natural selection. We increased fitness by putting it what is it? by imposing the struggle for existence. Look at all the fitness that was, I mean, they didn't literally say that, but why is this some great discovery? Maybe it wasn't advertised as such, but it kind of bothered me. They said, yeah, the fitness increased. I said, well, okay, what this points out is there's a decoupling between functional fitness and just counting offspring. You may have deteriorated the genome in the process, but you don't account for that. And what I think the reason I was throwing that example out is I said, this is how distorted their worldview is. They're scientific. They're just counting offspring. Whereas the problem they're really trying to solve is whether the complexity increased.
Yep.
I got the impression when I read those papers, they're just assuming that novel complex features were accounting for this. Again, in Brady's paper, what was it, the harmonious complexity?
Yes.
Being so, and so the reason I threw that fruit fly experiment, and then also in light of Lenski's experiment and other experiments, and also even the Spiegelman monster experiment, that reproductive success, differential reproductive success, is sometimes anti-correlated with complexity. Complexity is a liability for differential reproductive success. And that's why in the thumbnail to my part 4 video today on my channel, I used intelligence and childlessness. So that's the only reason I didn't want you to just waste your time on the entire fruit fly thing. I just wanted to give examples of where people, I mean, I'm presuming radiation's just damaging to the genome.
Yep.
Where they're citing genetic deterioration and increase in number of offspring is an example of Darwinian selection or evolution, evolution at work.
Yep. And again, just because you get more offspring doesn't necessarily mean that the organism has increased in complexity or anything like that. They're trying to use that one as a proxy for the other, and it's just not a good.
Yeah,
it's not a good argument.
And now, just to be cautious, I won't say that natural selection won't absolutely make anything complex. I think creationists are too eager to make a very sweeping concept. And then, the reason that's vulnerable, and it was in Otangelo's debate with Dapper Dino, some evolutionary biologists could make a claim in a field you're totally unfamiliar with. It may or may not be right, but you won't be equipped to deal with it if you're making a sweeping claim.
Right.
So I don't, even though I might believe that it's very, very rare natural selection could make something, I'm not going to make the sweeping claim that it doesn't. So your point about criticizing Randy, I can't pronounce it, Galuza. What was it again that you criticized him for?
My complaint with him was that he says natural selection does not exist, which I just can't go there. I can go with a lot of what he says. Like, I think a lot of what he says is very interesting. And actually, CMI put out a video today, believe it or not, on this topic. So it wouldn't be hurt to go have a look at that, where they talked about some of his ideas versus natural selection. But other than that, I just can't. I think some of his ideas are interesting, but I can't go to the point where I say that everything is generated internally.
Yeah. And just like, I'm very cautious about making certain sweeping statements of conceptions. Mm-hmm. I prefer to play probabilities and then also argue for individual systems. So, because like some people say, well, it's obvious the humans and chimps share common ancestry. I'll say, well, the model of common descent would account for some features. It doesn't account for others. And I'm more comfortable saying that. So I'm not saying, what we're not saying is that natural selection can't do anything.
Right.
And so that's, again, echoing your criticism of Randy Gazula. How's it pronounced?
Galuza.
I'm sorry. Apologies to the director. I'm not. Gazula.
Galuza.
Oh, Galuza.
Yes.
Randy Galuza, great guy, by the way, brilliant. Brilliant guy. Galuza.
Yes, Galuza. Yeah.
And then along those lines, I don't say that irreducible complexity is a problem for evolution. I will specifically say the need for simultaneous changes is a problem for a lot of features. And again, Brandolini's law, how many features do I need to identify? And it could be a very large number. We don't know. There could be so much in biology, because to make a case for even one system, it takes me a year. And how many systems are there in biology? How many enzymes?
A lot.
So, that's why I'm not too quick right now at this point to make a sweeping statement. But, that's just my preference. I find I'm more comfortable debating individual systems and showing the wonder than making broad sweeping. Now, this is getting away from Brady's paper, but see, the thing about Brady's paper, he was making a lot of generalizations, and it was great. He had some historical anecdotes and especially some specific stuff with physics, but not, in the modern day, what we can fill that out now with actual specific examples and say, here's an adaptation. You can actually decouple the adaptation from reproductive success. And that's the other thing is, I briefly said this last night, that a biophysicist can say the eye is optimal in terms of geometric optics. It can focus light. It can do these other things that we know that when we're building optical systems, like say for robots or, drones, we can apply the same optimality metrics there. And I was thinking, okay, so we have creatures that would do well without eyes in an environment where it's dark. I could think of like chemotrophs. It's like eyes won't really do them much good, right?
Right.
And yet there are environments where eyes work. So the problem is, it's like we can conceive of adaptation independent of reproductive success. And when we can, the other side, the evolutionary side, doesn't want to give up the idea that you can define adaptationists and what they call teleology outside of natural selection. And that's why I think the quote by Gould in RH Brady's paper was gold, because what's changed since 1979 has been the continued rise of biophysics.
Yes.
And biophysics is just like so awesome in the way that it discovers how biology works. You just can't help but wonder. One of my favorite systems is the quantum spin chemistry magnetic compass, because it takes it. I was reading the paper that described this by the physicist. I was crawling through it. It was so difficult. And like, I kind of embarrassed myself saying, I have a degree in physics. I could barely understand half of it, but they're going through all of these were classes I took, and I just like, they're taking it to a new level. They're throwing all sorts of mechanics and quantum mechanics and electromagnetic theory into it, and then integrating it with chemistry. And you're like, this is just mind-boggling. And that's only one system in biology. And so we have now examples and say, how do you explain that in terms of reproductive success? I wanted to say there are examples where you don't have like a gradient, as Darwin anticipated, that like Seigart talked about this, and that that were the James Tour After Show on John Maddox's channel, where they had the panel of PhD chemists, Seigart, James Carter, and Ryan Hayes, and they were all wondering at the potassium ion channel and the sodium ion channel, which I've highlighted a lot. And there's no gradient. You don't have a halfway formed, you don't have a channel that kind of gets some potassium ions and some different, it either works or it doesn't. Because either you're going to let all these other ions in or let no ions in. or you're just going to let that potassium ion through. It tends, there's a lot of stuff in biology. It's all or nothing. And that was the contribution of Behe, that there's no, so Behe was like 1997, 98, about 20 years after RH Brady. He put forward things that could actually falsify, at least theoretically falsify it. So it might not have been empirical, but he could say these are theoretical. It could lead to experiments if they're willing to try. But in my opinion, they're so obvious that it's not even worth trying. What I mean by that is, like, say we have a topoisomerase. You cut let's just knock out half of that and see if it's going to evolve. It's not going to, everyone pretty much assumes that experiment's going nowhere because the creature would be dead to start off with.
Yep.
So we could say we could falsify it theoretically, but it should be so obvious. No one's even going to try the experiment. It's like, okay, let's just start off with half a topoisomerase. Let's see if you're going to evolve a creature. It's a non-starter. I mean, I think they almost ought to try it, just,
I mean, they should try it, but we all know what the result's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, we know the results. Why do we know? Because we have chemotherapies. We know what happens when you disrupt topoisomerase function. It's really rather obvious, And by the way, there are other ways to knock out topoisomerase. You can, just like we do with chemotherapy. But yeah, for completeness, try it. But no one's going to try it. And so Behe succeeded in making us think of these theoretical counterexamples. So now we actually have theory destroying we actually have good theory destroying what was a previously unassailable theory. And then on top of that, we have had all the experiments that show reductive evolution. And also in microbiology, we see that bacteria, if it weren't for plasmid transfer, they love to throw away their genes.
Yep. Bacterial genomes are constantly being streamlined reductionistically.
Yeah.
To basically strip them down to the bare minimum. And the only way they don't go down to the bare minimum is through plasmid transfer.
Yeah. So I was very verbose. That was my chance to do my RH Brady imitation.
That is perfectly fine. I think that was a very, very good walkthrough of just some of the problems that we've got here. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to say, so the critics say, you're citing a 1979 paper. I said, it's gotten so much worse now.
Mm-hmm.
Because Brady wasn't even articulating at the time how we might falsify this. We've been able to. I could tell that in the paper he said, we need to conceive of this. Some things have just dropped in our lap. And credit Michael Behe, he has conceived of ways to falsify it for certain systems, not evolution in general. And I credit him for being cautious enough not to try to be a full-blown creationist and, with the arguments he made. For the set of arguments he made, it's appropriate to falsify natural selection, not quite enough to falsify universal common ancestry. I personally think the way universal common ancestry will be falsified, outside of our theological beliefs,
right,
is to the extent we show that the life is young. We can do that if we show the earth is young. And I think there's observational evidence to that effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. So, all right, this is a good comment from Patrick Alexander. I want to bring it up. Sal, what would you say to this? Because you're more into the irreducible complexity side of things, in not necessarily agreeing with it than I am, because I tend to stick to more organismal stuff. So, what would you say to this comment? Like, what do you think is a good response to that?
It is a good idea, but I don't throw it out in the middle of a debate or anything I write. So the idea of needing many simultaneous changes to evolve something is still a good idea. But again, if you watch when Michael Behe appeared on Dr. Dan's channel, and I actually credited Dr. Dan. I said that was hard-hitting and fair, and I said I wanted ID proponents to see that, because what ended up happening is, rather than talking about any specific system, Michael Behe was trying to articulate and define the concept and defend its utility for 45 minutes. And that's all. If he spoke about a single system, like say a helicase, topoisomerase, or a potassium ion channel, and say we need simultaneous changes, then you'd have a discussion where the other side can't derail it on definitional arguments.
Right.
So the whole thing is the idea is correct. You can use the idea. I would just avoid trying to make some sweeping general argument, because then you're gonna anytime you say, this is a problem for evolutionary theory, irreducible complexity, and you're just general like that, you're going to get into this. They're going to love you for that. They would like you to get in an argument over definitions. And
yes.
I said, you need to get away from arguing definitions. You need, as what RH Brady was saying, you need to describe the real world and force the other side to show that they've not explained the real world, that the theory doesn't explain it. And so I'll give another example that I hear. People will get pulled into these arguments on whether creationism, creation science, or idea science. I said, avoid those things.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be arguing why evolutionary theory fails, why natural selection fails, why abiogenesis fails. You don't need to be arguing definitions. Oh, this is a definition of irreducible complexity, and that's not irreducible. So what happened was Dr. Dan was saying, is this system irreducibly complex? Or is this one not? Or is this one not? And it's like, this was painful to watch. It's like, okay, this is what we call derailing the conversation from what should be the focus. And that's my main thing. It's a great idea, but I avoid using it in debate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I'm crediting Michael Behe. I'm just saying, if you don't need to throw the buzzword in, don't use it. So his basic idea was, when you need multiple simultaneous changes to affect a change, that's evidence against natural selection, that it can't be built up incrementally. Very simple. Can we identify systems like that? And so I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I just try to avoid the phrase. So maybe that's what I'd say. Great idea. I avoid the phrase in describing a system because it has some baggage to it. Because what Dr. Dan will say, that's an irreducibly complex system. I falsified it with this one example. Therefore, the whole theory is false. And then, you get into this is red herrings. You get involved in arguments. I would be drawn into an argument about virology, which I have no background in. I'm a protein guy. And this is exactly, you see, it just invites things. He'll say, is this irreducibly complex? I said, that, if you ask me that, I say, that's irrelevant. The issue is whether this is evolvable. You see, he can frame it and say, is this irreducibly complex? And he'll say, well, I falsified it for these systems. And it's, I got an email from my Tangela and said, can you analyze this? I said, you shouldn't have brought it on the table anyway, because you're making it easy for him to throw in something you're totally unfamiliar with. And I don't want to be arguing about these Viroporin
right. And this is something
in virology that I have no familiarity with. And even if it's true, that doesn't explain topoisomerase or helicase or transmembrane proteins or the evolution of eukaryotes. So that's, I hope that clarified. Is that helpful, Patrick? If you could respond in the chat, I'd be appreciative.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think we tend to get drawn into, well, we want to fight on these particular grounds, and we want to respond to everything that pull out. Don't get sucked into a definitional argument. That's how the social justice warriors operate too. They try to make you define a term, and then they say, well, that's not what that actually is, and then they get sucked into a definitional war. Don't fight that war. Right. Yes, you need to define terms, and yes, you need to, walk through stuff, but don't fight on that ground. Fight, because then you're letting them pick the ground for the engagement.
Exactly.
You pick the ground.
And you know, the problem is it's easy to try to just read ID literature and then debate an evolutionist.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
What we have, Godzilla's Freak said, blackjack mindset at work. And Patrick Alexander said, yes, I see your angle, Sal. So thank you. Okay, so this what we've done here in these 5 painful episodes on RH Brady's paper,
Mm-hmm.
it's learning their language and to frame the problem in their language, because then they have no excuse. They're not going to argue irreducible complexity. What Brady did is, and it's really almost too bad he's not on our side, because what he would do with the debate would say, like Dr. Dan, he'll say, okay, this is what evolutionary literature has said. This is what people on our side have said. What do you do with it now? We're not citing Michael Behe. We're not citing Duane Gish. We're citing our people. And so that's why I feel what Emory and I have done, it's painful. It's like dealing with doo-doo.
Yeah. And this
you know,
is why this is why I always tell people, yes, cite creationist sources, that's fine, but do not rely on them exclusively. Read the peer-reviewed literature. Understand it. Understand their terms. Use their terms.
Yeah. And is that hard? Absolutely. And not everyone has time for it. That's part of the reason I felt it was important that someone like Emory and I would kind of walk you guys through it as best as we can and say, this is not easy. You know, taking the fight, you know, it's really easy to watch a debate and say this is easy and it's shallow, but we're losing people from the churches. Mm-hmm. You know, especially they go off to these universities, and sometimes, you know, this is why I'm going the extra mile, and it is hard. I know I want to thank everyone who has been with us these, you know, a good fraction of these 5 nights, because this is not pleasant stuff. I'd rather be studying other things than cleaning up someone else's doo-doo, honestly. But someone's got to be the janitor, right?
Yep. Someone has got to go through and read this and go, okay, this is what it means. This is, and we got to sit here and explain it so that everybody gets it. And look, I get that this is not always going to be fun, but you know, life isn't about always, you know, sunshine and roses. Sometimes you got to wade through stuff to get where you're trying to go. Right.
So you know, I'm hoping we don't have to do too many of these. I'd rather talk about the wonders of biology and the beauty that the Lord has made, and honor him and declare his works. So this is just kind of like cleaning house. But if, you know, I don't want the critics to say we haven't explored this with some level of depth. And we've explored it. Praise the Lord for Paul Nelson.
Yes, amen.
I can't imagine how many, you know, the guy will read just all the guy must be reading papers all day long, and then he'll find one. And this is one example. And so we're blessed that he dug this up, because it's literature that's ignored, but it's really spot on. And so it's really great we stumbled on this. And you know, I felt we had to at least do this once, and I was saying, yeah, this is going to be painful, but I think it'll help educate me and Emory as well for the future. And I hope that'll help us be a better service to the creationist community. One example is, I'll say, we don't have to use the word irreducible complexity. I actually found Andreas Wagner saying, you know, I define a system as many well-matched parts serving a purpose. I'm just like, yeah, that does sound a lot like PE. And so we don't have to use, you know, like, for example, when I argued genetic entropy, I use their terms. I talk about reductive evolution in the more general sense. That's their term. That's not our term.
It really helps to understand both sides' terminology, so that when you talk to somebody, you can understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I hope we've also been enlightening on what the meaning of fitness is. It's been abused, and I hope we've you all have seen also how myths are perpetuated, like biology's central theorem. So we're going on 2 hours. I'd like to thank all the people in the chat. Maybe Emory, maybe afterward we can talk about, since we have about another week before grad school starts.
Yep.
I'd like to get on your calendar. So maybe after the show we can
Sure.
do a little planning.
Yeah, so
and actually, while we had the side chat, would you guys like us to talk about anything in the side chat?
I will take suggestions.
Yeah.
So if there's something you want us to talk about, particularly for whatever reason, definitely let us know.
Yeah. And if it comes up to you, it doesn't have to be now, but if you have any ideas right now that are just pressing, go ahead and say it, because I've found that some of the things people have asked have actually been, I'm like, why didn't I think about talking about that and looking into it? So,
yep. I find that the people we talk to often have better ideas than I do.
And and it's not restricted to biology. Do you? Okay, I have an idea, Emory, and I actually, let me see if Dr. Dan has responded. He said he wanted to. No, he hasn't responded. I sent out a letter to inviting a bunch of people, and you were also in that list. I was saying I'm going to do a history of intelligent design and creationism, starting from like Cicero's time, which is before Christ, all the way to the present day. And non-biology related young Earth topics would be interesting. Godzilla freak. That's interesting. Actually, in my talk on that I was suggesting on the history of creationism and intelligent design, I found out that Augustine was even citing evidence of Noah's flood, the seashells on top of the mountains. I said, I didn't know that they even knew that back then. Were you aware of that, Emory?
I was not. No, I'll be honest. I don't really I haven't read as much of the early church fathers as I wish I had. But that's shocking. I didn't realize they were aware of that back then. Yeah.
And I'm just like, and there's probably a lot of rich stuff. And agreed. That's what a scholar does, is he's going to dig through stuff. I'm sure there's other stuff. I just stumbled on that. I think it's because of the debate on what the church fathers believed about creationism. I was just looking into that a little bit. And
I'll answer that one for you, Sal. There isn't one. There is no debate. And RTB admitted it. So
I didn't know that, honestly.
Okay, so let me see if I can find it, because I have this link somewhere saved. I actually downloaded the PDF, but I want to drop it in the chat. Reasons to Believe published a paper back in 2014 or something like that. Something ridiculous, some ridiculous long time ago. And in that paper, the gentleman who wrote for them specifically stated that he could not find a single early church father who taught an old earth before Isaac Newton.
Wow.
Not one. Now, folks.
And to be fair, a lot of them were geocentrists. I'm not saying that, that they're immutable. John Calvin said that heliocentrists were of the devil. I'm just like, this was to give theologians a bad rap. So I'm not saying that it proves it true, because any of the theologians of the past that were geocentrists, they're just wrong. And so I'm not saying that it's still historically important.
Right.
And this thing about Noah's flood and the shells on top of the mountains, and it was in Augustine's writings, I just found that compelling, because they keep saying that this is a sectarian thing that was generated by Duane Gish and all that. The theistic evolutionists will try to say that young Earth creationism is this movement started by Duane Gish and John Whitcomb. I'm just like, no, it has roots all the way back to as far back as we could see, that this is not really a new viewpoint. I might even argue the new viewpoint is something like Walton.
Absolutely, that's the new viewpoint. Absolutely, that's the new viewpoint. Walton's view is absolutely the new viewpoint. No question whatsoever.
Yeah, not concocted by, it was concocted totally apart from Christian traditions. And like I've already admitted, some Christian traditions, albeit informal like geocentrism, could be wrong. But there is still weight on, I mean, these are the people that have passed the faith down onto us. It deserves a certain reverence in that sense. So I'm getting some positive vibes that they want to talk about history, because that's more accessible than the philosophy.
Yes. Sorry, Danny.
It's more accessible than biophysics and these other hard topics and theoretical population genetics. And frankly, like I said, I'm with you guys because I feel that what we did was dig through doo-doo. It wasn't fun. I was getting irritated sometimes when I thought about what we're dealing with. Why? Because I feel, how stupid can the enterprise be? Why do I have to be fighting against this stupidity? They have to fix it themselves. And of course, we know why they won't. There's a cultural imperative to be naturalistic. And that's hard to fight. And I get that, So that answered it. I think we could have a lot of fun with history, but it also, it will also, I think it'd be very interesting. I think let's just, I know you're busy tomorrow with your podcast, and then you have your Saturday. Have you scheduled that for a certain time?
No, I haven't scheduled the live stream for a certain time. I'm juggling some balls in the air for Saturday, so I don't know what time that live stream is going to be yet. But I'm working on that.
Okay.
But I'll be recording the podcast tomorrow, but I will definitely have some time to do some video in the evening if it comes to that, Sal. So.
The reason I may be on a road trip next week.
Okay.
Partly in connection settling my mother's estate.
Right.
How far are you from Memphis or Nashville, Tennessee?
We'll go through that off air. We're still on the air. But yeah, so thanks everybody for showing up.
I want to protect private information. I apologize.
That's fine.
So as far as as the viewers are concerned, you live in the North Pole.
No, I have said previously where I live, so that's not a complete.
Okay, so we won't go there.
Yeah, but we won't go
I just wanted to say it occurred to me I may not be able to. I may have limited live shows for next week anyway, because I may be traveling, so that's why Friday might be productive. Now it's still a little bit short schedule for me, but I think I could gin something up, and I think it'd be fun. And so we could talk about scheduling off air,
right?
But we've gotten some good feedback, because I'm afraid I'm losing subscribers and interest on my channel because of the last 5 days. It's just been too much.
Yeah, it's been nerdism for sure. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close out the live stream. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Thank you very much for all the likes. I think I have actually more likes than I have viewers right now. So thank you all very much for that. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming out and listening to me and Sal nerd out about a biology paper for 5 nights in a row, essentially. And also stay tuned to my social medias, Parler, Twitter. I hate Twitter, but Twitter, Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. I will be posting link to the Rumble stream when I've got that set up. And we'll be nerding out about a paper on sexual selection. So now it's a shorter paper, only about 4 pages, so it shouldn't take us too long to read. But it's a good thing to test Rumble with. Everyone, and also to be on the lookout for some more nerdy papers coming out of In His Image blog. If you already follow that, if you don't already follow us on one of the social medias, you probably should. Just saying. Anyways, so thank you all very much for watching. And we're going to go ahead and close out with a word of prayer, and we will call it a night. Dear God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to come together tonight. We thank you for the good live stream that we've had tonight. We thank you there were no YouTube gremlins. We thank you for the people who have showed up and been interested and generated good comments. And Lord, I pray that you will just bless us all as we go to our own place tonight. Help us to accomplish what we need to accomplish, Lord. Be with Sal as he grieves the loss of his mom. Give him strength and help him as he goes through that. And Lord, I pray that you will just bless the remainder of our week and help us to glorify you, honor you, and praise you in everything we say and do. I ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you very much.
And thank you.